So Joel is preparing a PhD. He's going to explain all this to you, and he's interested in the case of Lausanne in particular.
Yeah.
And this is because this is 100th anniversary, as you know.
Actually, it's not really about my PhD thesis, but it's another subject. It's really fine too. I know that we are running a little bit out of time, and that I'm the last person between you and the lunch, so we'll try to stick to time. Yeah, so far the last two presentations were on cities that actually hosted the Olympic Games. My perspective will be a bit different since I'm focusing on a city that wanted to host the Games but actually never did. Therefore, I will see a little bit how this Olympic dream influenced the hosting, like sports events hosting strategy of Lausanne, also with the presence of the IOC on the territory. Then I will focus a bit more on the policy that sustained this strategy and so on. So the first link that we can find between the Olympic Games and Lausanne through the Modern Olympia project. At the beginning of the 20th century, Coubertin wants to fix the Olympic Games in one location. It seems that it's mainly the political tension throughout the world and the difficulties to find a host destination that motivates him. So first he selected the location in Morges. It's a city between Lausanne and Geneva. But a change in the political elected officials see the project fall through. So then he a second location was selected that is actually right here on what is today the campus. That's are some of the drawings of the plans that could have taken place here. But this time the economical context and the general situation after the First World War will also see the project fall through. This second failure brings an end to the Modern Olympia project, but it's also the beginning of the Olympic candidacy from Lausanne. Coubertin wanted to see Lausanne host the Games in a way, so he lobbied a lot the local authorities. Finally, there will be an official candidate in 24, and they will send, it's interesting because they will send actually the letter straight to Coubertin himself and not to the IOC to say that they are candidate. And it's an open candidacy letter, so they say that they are ready to host the game of 32 should Los Angeles replace Amsterdam in 28, and if they cannot, then they are open to also organize the game of 36 that are not yet attributed. So finally, Amsterdam will host the game of 28, Los Angeles the game of 32. And for 36, with the candidacy of Berlin, then Coubertin realized that maybe it's not the best time for Lausanne, so he advised the local authority to postpone their candidacy for later on. Finally, there will be candidate for 44, 48, 52, and it will be unsuccessful every time. We can see mainly two reasons behind the successes failures. The first one is Coubertin's loss of influence at the IOC. Since for a long time, Lausanne's authority believed that his will to see the games take place in Lausanne should be enough to win the bid. But especially after his retirement from the IOC, distance grew between him and the new IOC members, and therefore the city was a little bit in a weird position to try to find a balance between their relation with Coubertin and the relation with the IOC. The other point is the transformation of the game themselves. If we look since the 30s, especially the political stake behind the selection of the host destination start to be kind of important, and we see it especially with the game of 36 in Berlin. But the game themselves are growing. More athletes, more competition, and it's harder and harder for cities like Lausanne. It's less than 80,000 inhabitants at that time to already host, like to have the infrastructures and so on to host the games. However, it's not the end of the candidacy themselves. There will be 3 other candidacies after. For the 1960 Summer Olympic Games, actually it's the only time they get close to a win, since they lose only on the 3rd round against Rome. Then the 1994 Winter Olympics, but this time a referendum wrote an end to the bid. in 88, where 62% of the population voted against the financial risk that comes along with the project. It's interesting since it was kind of a surprise. Only one political party was against the Olympic Games, all the other were in favor, but still, it was still pretty important. Finally, the foundation of the Youth Olympic Games bring a new opportunity for Lausanne to pursue its Olympic dream, but then the decision will be taken next month, so we'll see. I will come back to the Youth Olympic Game at the end of my presentation. However, here it's interesting to see this evolution from summer game to Olympic winter games and now Youth Olympic Games. It's kind of a rational evolution when you think like in the perspective of a city that do not have the resources, either financial, human, so in terms of infrastructure, to host mega events such as the Olympic. But it's also interesting, we'll see later, but we can also observe this evolution from bigger events to smaller events in the sports event hosting strategy of the city. But before coming to the strategy itself, we can focus a bit on Samaranch since he kind of impulsed this strategy or bring the first step to the sports event hosting strategy of the city. During Coubertin's time, the relation between the city and the IOC were good, but somehow inconsistent. But then after Coubertin, for a long time, let's say that people didn't really care that the IOC was in Lausanne. So it's only during Samaranch's time and presidency that the relation between the IOC and the city will be reinforced. That's also due to Samaranch that really wanted to use Lausanne as the cornerstone of his action for the Olympic movement. He took some kind of symbolic decision, like giving the Olympic capital title in 82, Olympic city title in 82, the Olympic capital title in 94. Of course, that's more kind of symbolic confirmation of the presence of the IOC headquarters in Lausanne. But then there are some more tangible actions like the extension of the headquarters, the creation of the Olympic Museum, and so on. In Samaranch's vision, like Lausanne has mostly two roles. The first one was to be the administrative capital of world sports, so it means he tried to attract other international sport federations to the city. It started in 84 with the International Volleyball Federation. And of course, for him, it was also a way to reinforce the IOC influence over the International Sports Federation. But the other point was to make sure that the Olympic capital was also a place where sports live. So he suggested to the city, like local authorities, to implement or organize recurrent events, such as the 20 kilometers of Lausanne that still exist today, and also to host one-off events. The idea behind it is also to engage with the local population and to expect the local population to see, like, to be in favor of the Olympic movement and the future project. It works pretty well in the 80s and the 90s, but the end of the 90s was like another problem, let's say, especially with the bribery scandals or like all the scandals, especially linked to the Salt Lake City Olympics. Like these scandals damage, of course, the image of the IOC in the local population, and a lot of people were not really in favor of the IOC anymore. And then also the other problem was the change of presidency, especially for the local authorities. They didn't know if Samaranch's successor wanted to stay in Lausanne and to continue his action both regarding international sport organization and federation and sports events. Therefore, to kind of ensure continuity with Samaranch's action, they adopted two public policies in 2002. The first one is the Plan Directeur du Sport, who is kind of a novel overview of what the city expects for sports at different level. But one of the dimensions is like the use of international sport to promote the city and so on. We'll come back to it. And the other one is the Lausanne Capital Olympique, which give the resources, especially financial resources, to make sure that the city can bid to host international one-off events and to attract sports federation and organization. So the two dimensions of the internet, like linked to international sports, are the first one is like the International Sport Federation and Organization. So we can see that with one organization in 1915, today in Lausanne itself, we have 54 either headquarters or offices of International Sport Federation and Organization, and 63 in total for the Canton de Vaud. And it's interesting to see that in this case it works pretty well, like the continuity. Of course, there's kind of this virtuous cycle where one federation bring another and another and another. But after the 2002, like the adoption of the policy in 2002, we can still see a growth of the organization moving to Lausanne. Regarding the sports event hosting strategy, it's a bit different. First of all, in the policy itself, it's interesting since the only really measurable objective inside the policy is to host one major event per year. So first of all, the problem is to define what's a major event. That's already problematic. And when we speak with the local authorities, we realize that in their perspective, a major event is either a world or European championship, but actually they don't really care if it's a world championship in athletics or if it's a European championship in sumo. So we can imagine already that it's really different. Two examples that they actually hosted. No, not for the athletics, but for the sumo. However, if we see it like this, of course, it's kind of a success since after the adoption of the policy in 2002, they hosted at least one international event per year. But there are some interesting evolution. The first one is the one I mentioned before. It's like from bigger event to smaller events. Since in the 90s, with the support of Samaranch, they hosted, for instance, in 97, the World Championship in figure skating, in gymnastics, that had like kind of a big media attention, brought a lot of spectators. And after he left, Hogg was not against it, but it was not as supportive as Samaranch was. And for instance, in the last few years, the type of event hosted were much smaller, like in 2012 with the World Orienteering Championship, that even for the local population didn't have really a huge impact. The other evolution is from mostly World and European Championship, the city started to host international one-off events that are not meant to designate a world or European champion. It can be Davis Cup matches, cycling tours, or sports events organized by private companies such as Red Bull and so on. So more and more in recent years, there is like that type of event that are organized. Of course, that comes also from the competition between territories and the limited number of world and European tournament that you can actually organize in the territory. Just to see some of the challenges and so on they have to face, like for sports, federation and organization, of course, so far it seems pretty good. The situation is always increasing and so on, but there is first of all a limited number of sports federations that they can still host. I mean, after a while, so they have to think a little bit of the kind of organization they would like to host. Other type, like other organization, maybe companies linked to sports, like the cluster idea behind it is of course to try to evolve, like to see this situation evolved. The other one, and it's of course linked also to the recent weeks with the FIFA scandals and so on, it's like ethic and legislation issues that are raising while hosting sports federation and organization. Especially linked to the local population, like we see it through the media, but then the reaction of the local population that do not always understand why this, because they always have in mind, of course, FIFA or the IOC or UEFA, why do they have like this kind of special structure that allows them to not to pay any taxes and so on. So it's a question they will have to answer also with the federal authorities and so on, of course. Then regarding the sports event hosting strategy, as we have seen, it's went from bigger event to smaller event. But of course, we can wonder if it can achieve the development objective. Usually a sports event hosting strategy is implemented to help the territory to develop economically, socially, politically, and so on. But in the case of Lausanne, it's interesting since they adopted the policy that are sustaining the hosting strategy to ensure continuity with what Samaranch was doing. So they never really reflect on why they should host sport events. Like, they did it, so let's continue to do it. And not like, since they don't have really a strategic vision behind it, they don't really know what kind of event they should bid for. And that's also very true when we speak directly to them. It's more like an opportunity, like when they see an opportunity with one event, especially linked to some of the federations that have the headquarters in Lausanne, they try to bid for. That brings me kind of to the conclusion and to the youth, like Winter Youth Olympic game. Right now the campaign is going on. Maybe you have seen some of the stickers or flags in the metro and so on. It's really interesting. I think we talked a bit about it this morning already, but both in the media and in the general population, people are more or less in favor of the Youth Olympic Games. At least they're not against it. And that's kind of course, like no one is against youth doing sport, you know, it's nice. But they never really like reflect on why they should host the Youth Olympic Game. Is it for the image, like promotion of the image of Lausanne? We can wonder, since in most of the population are, I mean, not aware of where the last Youth Olympic Game took place, and I'm sure they're not aware where the next Youth Olympic Game will take place. Economical impact, same. It's already unsure with major events, so with like the Youth Olympic Game, it's really not sure. Social, like to improve, like engage with the community and so on, especially since Lausanne is not a winter resort, so most of the competition will take place in other locations, either in Canton de Vaud, even some of them in France. It will be really hard. Then, of course, there's all the regeneration idea behind. There are many projects. Here we can see it's like the future student residence for the university or the ice hockey rink. It's all projects that already exist, but of course, the Youth Olympic Games working as an accelerator for those projects. So it's a good opportunity, but I'm not sure that's it. Of course, then, I didn't present it, but the other reason behind the Youth Olympic Games are also more personal image for politicians and so on to be in front of line of the media. Just maybe some food for thought for the local authorities through the concept of event portfolio. Since the sports event hosting strategy is mostly based usually on like one event strategy, like they host one major event and then they try to host another major event. They don't really like think on a yearly basis with different type of event, especially since hosting strategy different. Usually you have different type of objective, economic, social, political, and so on, and different types of target, tourist, resident, companies. So usually one big event cannot achieve all these different dimensions and address the different targets and so on. So it's the reason why, if they start to think in terms of event portfolio with different types of events planned through the year, it might be regional events, international events, one-off events, recurrent events, can help them to achieve this different kind of development objective they have. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I liked the legacy which has already happened for Lausanne 2020, because all these buildings were either planned or maybe accelerated a little bit, but we are very happy about the one on the left, which is the dorms for the students, and which will be built, by the way, right across the little stream next to IDEAP. So you can even visit the site of the next or maybe next dorms or Olympic Village for the 2020 Youth Olympic Games winter. Thank you very much again. Any questions? We are we are on time, basically. Maybe a few minutes late, but it's not too bad, really. I have a question. You said it, there are small events, big events, there are small organizations, sports organizations, sports organizations. Have you thought of weighting these organizations or these events to have a more subtle evaluation? That is, of course, there is an increase in the numbers, absolute numbers, but here you count, for example, UCI as same as a very small sports organization.
Yeah.
So have you thought of weighting?
Yeah. Once more, since it's not really like the thesis project, it's different. But the first way will be really with the number of employees. Then, of course, we can calculate different ways like gross generating and so on. There, it's really like the net number of, and also it's interesting because, as I said before, it's both headquarters and offices. But some of these organizations, they have an offices in Lausanne, but actually most of the time, no one is in the offices. It's just to make sure that they have something close to the IOC headquarters, but the number is different. And there it's the same with the sports events. I mean, as I said, for instance, in '97, they hosted 2 international events, World Championship in figure skating and in gymnastics. So that was a major, like it was really a big year for the sports service here in Lausanne and so on. But then you can have other years, like in 2013, where you have 3 events, but actually the 3 international events they hosted are much smaller. Maybe, like for instance, in '97, the local authorities were really engaged in the organization of the events. As in 2013, it's more other companies who came and they give authorization to organize the events and so on. So the implication for the city itself is very different.
So you would weight by implication of the city, or that's one dimension to take
I
into
mean,
consideration.
you should like use multi-dimension anyway to weight them, since like also it's the big question: is it like mostly spectator-driven, participants-driven, and so on? For instance,
More difficult for events.
In 2011, there was the World Gymnastrada in Lausanne. It's mostly participant, like it's almost 20,000 participants. It's not like there was not a lot of spectator out of the participants themselves, but it has already a huge impact only through the participants. But I don't know.
Well, thank you. Maybe last question from the participants. No.
Yeah. I will. Is there political opposition, and is it identified in terms of party position? You know, is there any kind of ideology about events benefiting certain segments of the population and so on?
Yeah. So first of all, you should know that the city of Lausanne itself, let's say, like at least in recent years, is much more on the left side. So there was some tension, especially inside the parties, saying like, okay, the IOC, the international events are mostly kind of elite events and are not like for the whole population. But I don't know if it's true, but at least through the speeches and so on, they try to say, okay, we do also a lot for popular sports. And it's true that through the year we have a lot of recurrent events that are really popular. But then I think it's still surprising. Like, for instance, if I take the 1988 referendum, the only party that was against the Olympic Games was the Ecological Party. And there was really like one political figure that is today in the executive was against it, so win it. But if you look at his speeches today and so on, he's really in favor of the Olympic movement and the IOC. I think it's really like, but you cannot always link the opposition to one specific sports event to the opposition of, like, in the case of the IOC or sports events in general. But of course, there is like still this kind of balance between people who are, let's say, unease with the presence of international sports federation in the city and in Switzerland in general. and like still seeing the benefits for the population and the state through taxation of the employees and so on.
Perhaps you'll allow me, because I think I am the doyen, as we used to say, the, the old one up here, to speak on behalf of all the speakers, and perhaps on your behalf as well, to thank the university and to thank Jean-Luc Chapelet and Emmanuel for inviting us, hosting us, and for all of the staff too, for the people who are doing the recording, the audio-visual people, and those who have guided us around. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you to all of you for participating in this symposium. I enjoyed very much, we all, I think, enjoyed very much this last 2.5 days. And but the only, well, if you have any comments, please send them to us. It will be helpful, because I hope we can transform this one-off into a recurring event, maybe, or heritage event in the future. So let's see you maybe in a couple of years' time. Thank you very much again.